stories, you know, they are at the center of theater from way back. You know, we have, you know, Seneca has ghosts in his plays. We have ghosts in the Eumenides. You know, we have Clytemnestra telling the ghost of Clytemnestra telling the Furies to, you know, go seek, you know, revenge for her death and go chase down Orestes, her son. We have ghosts that return to warn the living of something, right? So we have Hamlet's father at the very beginning returning to say, hey, you know, watch out and avenge me. And, you know, and it really sort of sets the story in motion. What we want to think about is, and you all will have your own sort of trove of ghost stories from theater that are probably personal to you and just, you know, how various texts that you've come across. But I want to sort of just think about some seminal texts here. So if we think about Shakespeare, and if we think about some of those sort of revenge tragedies, ghosts tend to come back, with information. They tend to be, they tend to have information that the living are not privy to, or only the sort of perpetrator, the villain is privy to, but the protagonist is not privy to. Sometimes they actually have information about the future. You know, in Richard III, we have a whole sort of parade of ghosts that comes and says, you know, you're gonna meet your demise. You know, we have, you know, Lady Anne, and I'm trying to think of we have the two brothers that he, you know, we have this just all these ghosts that come before the big battle scene. In no theater, and this is actually something worth lingering on a little bit, in no theater we have ghosts that actually do something far simpler, that's less about plot, and also more mysterious, and it may actually be useful for us to think about. So the standard storyline in a no play is you have a traveler, and the traveler is journeying sometimes to a temple or journeying back to their homeland, to their home village, and they encounter a stranger. You know, and this should be sort of familiar to, because this is also kind of a trope in folk tales as well. They encounter a stranger on the road, and the stranger tells them a story, and it sort of ends up sort of unspooling that as they tell this traveler's story, that they in fact are the protagonist in the story, and this is something that happened where they're either talking about their own death, whether it's a death by, you know, by murder, by some sort of, you know, bad deed, or whether it's something more tragic, you know, a drowning or a, you know, and then as soon as that revelation happens, the stranger, you know, evaporates into the mist, and the traveler is forever in some way transformed by that encounter. So in that instance, I think the ghost is less of a plot device. It's less of the ghost isn't a messenger of warning. The ghost is actually doing something which I think is probably more familiar to our contemporary playwrights, which is the ghost is haunting the living. The ghost is saying, hey, I'm here, and you don't normally see me, but I'm here. And part of the job of the play, in a way, is putting a frame on that. I'm here, you know. So I want you just to have this in your mind as we sort of move on to some of these writing exercises. There's sort of also a lot of contemporary examples that might be useful as well as you think. So in this spirit of, hey, I'm here, I want you to think about Our Town. You know, that sort of play that all of us have probably seen a production of, Thornton Wilder's Our Town. And the ghosts in that play are really actually more cousin to the ghosts in no theater than one might think. And I recall, as I remember, there's actually a wonderful book of letters of Thornton Wilder and writing letters to Gertrude Stein. And I think some of the letters are actually about no theater. So this is not, I think that no plays may well have been in Thornton Wilder's mind as he was writing Our Town. And in that instance, what we have, if you recall that scene, is we have Emily, you know, we have the graveyard, we have the people who have died sort of sitting to the side of the stage, and then we have the character of Emily returning from the land of the dead to the land of the living. And she wants very much to return. She has this hunger as a ghost to return. And I think that's also worth thinking about. Why do ghosts want to return? What's that hunger that propels them? And sometimes it's very personal, and I think in the case of Our Town, it really is. She wants to see her family one more time. And then it also has some cosmic resonance as well. She wants to experience what it is to live one more time with the wisdom of a ghost, with the wisdom of someone for whom the experience of living is forever out of reach. And the revelation for us as an audience is a kind of reframing of what it means to be alive, if it works, if the play works as it, I think, is meant to work. So in that instance, it's I think a variant of theater, which is instead of having a stranger meeting the traveler on the road, we have a loved one meeting, well, and she's not seen, she sees, but she's not seen, meeting her own experience as a living, breathing human. I think related to that, sort of on a continuum, I would say probably the next playwright that occurs to me would be August Wilson. I think August Wilson, if you go from no theater to Our Town, I think there is a progression to plays like Joe Turner's Coming On and panels, and in that we have this idea of a haunting. We have, and the kind of, I think, particular contribution of August Wilson's plays is that he's managed to, I think, take the haunting of a particular individual and thread it through a sort of a larger historical haunting. And I think that's something also to think about in terms of your own writing, if you end up in some way incorporating ghosts, is are your ghosts personal ghosts, or are they also personal ghosts that are at the same time embodiments or vessels of historical, sort of history and some kind of larger sort of movement of history. I think we kind of keep going from there to some sort of random examples, and I'm happy to send these plays to you. They're kind of wonderful plays. Some are better known than others. There's a play that I think actually all the MFA playwrights have by Lauren Gunderson called I and You, which is a ghost story, really. And it's a ghost story in which and this is something also to think about, which is we do not know that the ghost is a ghost. Again, as in no theater, the traveler does not know the ghost is a ghost. And that's one of the big revelations in the play, that this character that we sort of think is just another teenager, it's two teenagers, is in fact not only a ghost, but is a ghost that is connected to the protagonist in I kind of don't want to give it away for those of you who haven't read the play. It's a very, I'll send it to you. I don't want to give it away. But suffice it to say that the ghost is a very personal, physical connection to the protagonist. Sarah Rule, in her play Eurydice, also has kind of an interesting spin on the ghost story. So what she's done, right, she's taken this fable of Orpheus and Eurydice, and we have the ghost of Eurydice, and in the original Greek myth, right, Eurydice is this mute character who dies at the very beginning of the story on her wedding day. She's bitten by a snake and she dies, and then she's silent in the underworld. Orpheus is the hero. Orpheus goes down to save her. Orpheus, has his doubts and turns around and she disappears, but she's sort of mute throughout. And what's kind of wonderful about Sarah Rule's Eurydice is that she takes the silent ghost and gives that ghost a voice, and actually makes her the central character as opposed to this sort of object that's sort of acted upon. And it's a really, it's exciting, and it also, what's interesting, and again, to think about your own ghost story, here we have a ghost story that's almost a love triangle. It's a love triangle between, it's Eurydice and Orpheus, and then Eurydice's deceased father. And she's sort of toggling between the two and trapped, between her her love for both of these characters. And that ends up being the sort of motor of the ghost story. I want to give one more example, and then I want to move to the writing because I want to spend as much time as possible in the writing. Lauren Yee, who is a graduate of this program, as you know, her play, Cambodian Rock Band, in a certain way is also a ghost story. It's many other things, but at the center is a kind of ghost story. And it's a ghost story that like I think actually August Wilson's plays, is a ghost story that is at once a personal ghost story and also a much larger kind of epic historical ghost story. So in Lauren's play, there's a character of the father. The protagonist is this young woman, and she's trying to understand her father. And her father has a whole kind of a memory of this time when he was living in Cambodia during the ascent of the Khmer Rouge. And again, I don't want to give away too much for those of you who don't know the play, but there is a group of friends of which he is a part, and there's one particular friend. And I would say that friend is a kind of ghost that animates the play. And it's something to think about, because I think sometimes we think of ghosts as these sort of almost, Victorian theater has a real tradition of ghosts, but it's kind of our sort of almost like cliched idea of ghosts. So Victorian theater, would have these like traps and sort of smoke machines and Pepper's Ghost, like these kind of effects where ghosts were sort of conjured. But sometimes ghosts are very human, and I actually think what the final sort of exercise of the day is, I would challenge you to think about how to make your ghost as human and sort of unghost-like and surprising as possible. And I would also want you to think about, as we sort of segue into this first exercise, what it is that haunts you as writers, what it is that haunts you either personally, what it is that haunts you as a creature of history. In other words, the sort of the inheritor of a legacy, whether it's a national history or whether it's particular familial history over the course of generations. What is it that haunts you as writers and artists? So with that, I want to segue to the first exercise, which is an exercise that the MFA writers are very familiar with, which is an exercise I call swimming. And swimming is essentially a free writing exercise. And there's only one rule with swimming, which is when I say go, I want you to keep writing without stopping. Okay? And if you do have a pen and paper, that's probably better. But if you only have your computer, that will do. If you get stuck, if for some reason you can't think of anything in that moment, I want you to use the following phrase: what I really mean to say. And I want you to keep writing what I really mean to say until something gets jostled loose and you do have something to say. All right? So the prompt for this particular swimming exercise is something or someone that haunts me. Something or someone that haunts me. Okay? And let me let you get settled, and then we'll begin. And we will do this for about 10 minutes. For those of you who haven't done swimming before, it's an exercise that you can do every day. It's 10 minutes. And what's really terrific about it is that there is no correct way to do it. So for example, you may find when you swim that you will actually circle around one idea. And maybe you may learn something about that idea. You may be able to sort of push through some kind of problem that you're trying to work out in the writing. But sometimes you will sit down to swim, and I think the MFA writers know this, and you will find that you will be swimming about nothing to do with writing. But even that's really useful because it's a way of sort of processing and releasing material that's not useful when you sit down to write. So at the very least, it's a way of kind of clearing your mind, and at the very best, it's a way of actually making discoveries. Let me ask you, just off the top of your head, and this may change, a week from today or a month from today. But if I were to ask you, what is something that that haunts you? That's something that you think might be the beginnings of a possible ghost story. What's somebody or something that could occupy that space of haunting, that would act as a ghost in a play that you might write that you've yet to have written? It's an open question. What haunts you? Vivian.
Based on what we swam on.
Or not. No, it doesn't have to be based on what you swim on. I should have made that clear. Just if you were to say, hey, if I said to you right now, all of you, hey, I want you to write a play that in some way has its engine a haunting, that has that sort of that ghost story motion, where you have either a literal ghost or a more figurative ghost, what would you write about?
I write about the church as a sort of like concept, but also like the same like haunting places. I think of like a church as well, as like a personal thing that haunts me.
I think that that's actually, you bring up something that is really important, which is that, and I didn't talk about this, but it's absolutely correct, is that there's a whole body of literature about places that are haunted. And so what's interesting is that if you were to incorporate that, and what I like about what you just said is that it's not actually just a building, it's whatever sort of childhood memory or sort of familial association you have with the rituals and the human drama inside that building that could yield, you know, any number of plays. You could all probably write different versions of that play. That's terrific. What else? Yes?
I started swimming about my grandmother, but I actually found something that was haunting to me was the idea of the wandering Jew. That's actually a big part of Jewish folklore and ghost stories. It's the Jew that, after they were banished from their ancestral homeland, just wandered throughout time, like the diaspora Jew that just keeps wandering, fleeing from places of persecution. And I think that's, I'm reading about that, like kind of ancestral wandering Jew a lot. So I don't exactly know what the play is there, but like there's some kind of movement.
You don't, and you don't have to know what the play is, because what you've just articulated is the seeds of potentially a fascinating character. Because my question to you would be like, who would that character be? If I said to you, Allie, you've got to take that idea, that trope of the wandering Jew, and figure out 3 different versions of what that character might look like. You know, what would that character be? And then I think plot and story would emerge from that. I also think that there's something about this idea of not recognizing or knowing your history that might thread into what you're talking about. And I actually think it's related a little bit to what Vivian's saying about the church as a haunted place. We have an idea of what our history is. It's the ghosts we know, and then the ghosts we don't know. And I think a play that in some way gets to the ghost we don't know or the ghost we don't recognize, I think is really intriguing. Other hauntings or ghosts, my peripheral vision, compromised by this table arrangement.
I had a kind of like, the prompt kind of had me thinking about like the just general supernatural things, and like thinking about like ghosts, God, and aliens, and how they all, like basically, okay, so the thread I kind of ended up on was like this idea of like, what is it about me that wants to see things as supernatural, if like ultimately a lot of like supernatural things maybe could be explained, and then I was like, is that a failure of imagination on my part, like not want to see something as a ghost or see something as a ghost? Like what ultimately, like what is the desire in me to see something otherworldly happening, and like what does that then say about like where I am in the world? That makes sense. So like so I found myself like thinking about like times when I thought I had seen a ghost, or times when I thought like or times when I thought I had seen a ghost, and like what that probably was, and then what my imagination turned it into. The reason I connected to aliens is because I was thinking about owls and how baby owls look like aliens, but people take those images and like turn that into like a bigger thing about like, oh, it must have been supernatural. But often it's just a baby owl. I don't know. that was the journey.
I didn't know that people did that, but now I'm
they look like really terrifying.
I believe it. I love that. I mean, so what's striking about that, and what I feel is the thread that I would pull on that, is the ways in which our perceptive faculties fail us, and the ways in which we actually may even know they're failing us, but we nonetheless play along. I think that's fascinating. I think that's fascinating on a human level, but I actually find that to be fascinating in this particular historical moment, because I think that there's a way in which we have these competing sort of mythologies and fables that are distorted variants of our own history and also what we're seeing in the present moment. You know, that term to be, you know, that are you being gaslighted, you know, feels relevant in terms of, it's not relevant in terms of baby owls, but it is relevant in terms of, I know this is a ghost. I know this is not a ghost, and yet I want to believe it is a ghost. And I will get very angry if someone tells me that I'm wrong. You know, I think you're plugging into something larger about making fictions and what we get psychologically from believing those untruths. You know, I think that's really interesting. Anybody else? All right, keep thinking about this. We're going to keep moving on. I want to make sure that you have sort of in your notes or in your mind some thoughts about the objectives of ghosts, right? So traditionally, and I suspect that this may be the less interesting objective for a ghost, but just so you have it, ghosts warn people. Ghosts are prescient. They in some way tell their human, you know, charges the future, what to watch out for. Something bad's going to happen. They warn. Ghosts curse humans. You know, think about Banquo. You know, think about. I mean, we see in these revenge tragedies. That's a very common thing. Ghosts come back and they mess humans up, and we see that in film. You know, it's the standard sort of horror genre. You know, someone dies in some sort of terrible circumstances in which there's somebody who actually did it, but then there are people who are also complicit in some way, whether or not they realize they're complicit. And then the horror film is basically all of those people who are complicit getting their just desserts. So I think actually that sort of very that sort of idea of a ghost story, that particular objective of a ghost, finds itself better suited maybe to the horror genre in film. Although I'd be interested in seeing what a revenge tragedy in the theater might look like in this day and age. That actually would be interesting. I don't know what that would look like. Ghosts also, I think, are trying in some way to liberate themselves, to process through some kind of trauma. That, I think, is something that you do see in theater, and I think you see it. I think you see it in a sort of you see it because there's a play called I actually didn't mention Vigils by Noah Heidel, and that's a play where you have a ghost that has unfinished business. He sort of comes back to deal with unfinished business, and it's sort of a comedy too. But that's also something that you want to think about. Does the ghost have just some sort of trauma that they're working out? You see it actually in, you also see this in Japanese folklore. There's a very famous ghost whose name is now escaping me, who was killed in a very brutal circumstance. There was sort of acid poured in her face, and she, well, I don't even know, she had some sort of poison that caused her face to droop, and you see these woodblock prints where her eye is sort of falling out of the socket. It's really gruesome, and she kind of comes back to sort of, you know, work this out with her kind of guilty husband, who's sort of, you know, so you see this kind of, it's this sort of repetition. There's also a maid character in Japanese folklore who broke a dish and then was drowned in the well by her master, and so she kind of comes back and is counting plates, and she's sort of doomed to sort of count the plates in order to sort of work out her psychic trauma. So in your story, in your hypothetical ghost story, does your ghost have a trauma? If so, what is the trauma, and how does the living person or the living persons in your play factor into that trauma? Ghosts also come back to, in some way, comfort or liberate, I think, the living, or provoke the living, to shake up the living in a certain way, which is different, I think, than warning the living. There's a way in which a ghost comes back to kind of, well, I think it's actually related to the ghost reframing the world for the living. And maybe it reframing the world only for the audience, not for the other characters on stage, but also for the other characters on stage. So think about, what is your ghost's objective for being here? Why is your ghost here? What does your ghost need from the other character on stage? Put a pin in that, because you'll need that in a little bit when we do our exercise. The other thing I want you to be thinking about, and there may be more than these two engines, but I think in plays at least, they're basically two things we're watching unfold in a ghost story. The first is if we don't know it's a ghost, who is if we don't know the character that's a ghost is a ghost, we are watching the revelation of their true identity, and that is something that happens either somewhere in the middle of the story and then we deal with the repercussions, or it happens at the end and suddenly we realize everything we've seen before we see with new eyes. So one engine is the engine of, oh, this is who I really am, the revelation of true identity. I think the other engine is one in which you have a sense that this is a ghost from pretty early on. And actually, I think August Wilson's plays work this way. There is a way in which, you know, we know these characters are haunting the living. And actually what we're watching is the characters, the living characters, in some way shake loose this ghost that is haunting them. So it's less about the true identity of the ghost and more about a kind of arm wrestling with the ghost, a struggle with the ghost, and who will come out on top, and will I be able to free myself from this, you know, this ghost that is haunting my spirit. All right, I want to do a list making exercise right now, and actually, AJ, do you have paper? Do you have more paper?
I do.
Excellent. So I want to do this because I actually feel like it will be better if we do it this way. How much paper do you have? You have a lot of paper. All right, I'm going to do it this way. All right, so we have 9 of you guys. I don't think I need quite that much paper. I think I can do it this way. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to write this on longhand because you're going to trade these. Okay, so I'm going to need more paper than that. Don't put away your paper. Okay. So 2, 2. All right, and we're going to do this. I need 9 altogether. Here, wait. AJ, will you pass those down? All right, you guys pass those down. And I think I'm going to need one more. Okay. Oh, 2 more? I'm going to need 2 more. No, 1 more.
I think just 1, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. My math was correct. All right. So I'm going to ask you to make a list. The playwrights I work with know that I like lists a lot. And I like lists because I think the space between the items on the list is kind of charged and electric, and I think I like exercises that in some way allow the mind to make associative leaps, and I think list making exercises sometimes do that. So let's see if you make some associative leaps. Listen, not to put too much pressure on you. No, this is easy. The first thing, don't think too hard. First item on the list, something sharp. Something sharp. Number 2.
I'm really writing one thing per.
One thing per, yeah. So something sharp. Write down something sharp. Scissors, yeah. Okay, number 2. A child's toy. Number 3. An old song. And old can be the 1990s. Sadly, or old can be really old, you know, the 1950s or what have you, an old song. Number 4, a thing you say every day. Number 5, a thing a child says.
every day. Sometimes.
A thing a child would say. Maybe I should put it subjunctive. Yeah. A thing a child would say. Number 6. And this one I actually, to Amara's question, number 6, I'd like you to answer. You're almost going to have a 6A, 6B, 6C, okay? So number 6, I want you to think of 3 statements of fact about the known universe. Okay, Amara's thinking, okay. A statement of fact about the known universe. Someone give me one that's an example.
Gravity
Is just a...
is here.
Gravity. It is indeed. Yes. Yeah. Chocolate is bad for dogs. I think that's true, actually. Something you think about, like, think about 5th grade history, 5th grade history, 6th grade science. Statements of fact about the known universe. Okay, and then the last one, again, is a 3-parter, so it's 7A, 7B, 7C, is 3 lines of dialogue that begin with, "Do you ever wonder?"
Statements of dialogue? Is that what you said?
Lines of,
Lines of
that could
dialogue.
be lines of dialogue, so, yeah. These are lines of dialogue on a Friday in April. You know, these are just how you answered these questions, you know, in one Friday in time. If you did it next Friday, they'd be different. Yeah. Okay. Xavier Lamar.
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry. No, don't be sorry. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, let's go one counterclockwise. So. That's right. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is take a moment to read the gift that your colleague just gave you, okay? And what I'd like to do is I'd like you to read, we're just going to go once around with each one, okay? Yeah? Mm-hmm. All right. Just we're not. Excuse me, not with each one. We're just gonna go. Maybe we'll go twice around. But let's. In other words, I don't want to hear everything on the list. So you choose.
Choose an item.
Choose an item. Correct. Thank you, Ava. Ava, I'm going to start with you because you're very clear.
Right. An old song is "Sweet Judy Blue Eyes."
Okay. Oh my God.
Do you ever wonder what I'd look like with Pixie cut?
Do you, Michael?
Allie?
Do you ever wonder if there's more to us than this?
Do you ever wonder why I left?
For something a child would say, video instead of video.
Oh.
For a fact, water is wet.
That's true. Just gonna leave.
See.
One of the facts, your parents are selfish.
Do you ever wonder why white people are so incapable of making tasty food?
So, all right. So you have these lists.
Should I do mine?
Oh yes.
Sorry.
Do you ever wonder if your mom secretly hates you?
That's really good. It's sad and scary. All right. So hold on to these. The thing with lists. So swimming is a great way to kind of prime the pump. Swimming is a great exercise to just kind of, deposit anything from your day so that you don't have to bring it to the writing, and also maybe think about stuff and circle around whatever topic you're working on. List making is kind of great because sometimes you will excavate something that you did not expect with an old song. And there are all kinds of items that you can use for a list. You can things you find in a kitchen. Food you find in a 7-Eleven. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, I have a bunch of them, and you could probably come up with your own. They're terrific because with them, you think about Steph. Say yours again.
Do you ever wonder if your mom secretly hates you?
Yeah. So suddenly you wonder not only about the mom, but you wonder about the character that has that anxiety. Is wondering. Suddenly a whole world begins to spin out from one thing, from either one item or one line of dialogue. All right, so this is what I'd like to do, and I want to make sure that we have time to do this. I want you to begin to write a play, a scene. Let's just say a scene. Okay. A scene that has a ghost in it. All right. And this is the exercise. This is the writing exercise, and you are going to use these. So bear with me. You are going to write a 2-character scene. Okay. At least one of your characters is a ghost. So one of your characters is a ghost. Potentially 2 of your characters are ghosts, but at least one of your characters is a ghost. Okay. You have to ask yourself, first off, does the character who is not the ghost, or does the other character realize that this character is a ghost? In other words, is the ghostness of the ghost evident? So do we know this character is a ghost, the audience? If we don't know this character is a ghost, are there any clues, either in terms of the character's comportment or how the character speaks, or anything in the universe of the play that might tip us off that that something's a little bit awry? Is there a glitch that causes us to wonder about whether or not this character is a ghost? So you have a 2-character scene. One character is a ghost. You want to think about how is the character who is a ghost related to the other character. So let's brainstorm for a second. What are some ways in which the ghost character might be related to the character who is, shall we say, not a ghost? Let's keep it simpler.
Parent.
Right. So so one family relationship could be parent-child.
Dead spouse.
Lover, spouse, and survivor. Right.
Like previous tenant or person who lived in a space where a current person now lives.
Right. And not just tenant, but to go back to your idea, Vivian, of this church, someone that in some way occupies a space. It need not necessarily be someone who lives there.
Right.
Absolutely. Someone that is linked to that space in whatever way. Good. What else?
Nemesis of some kind.
Nemesis. Yep. Can you think a little bit more about nemesis? Because that's a really interesting.
Like former childhood bully.
Bully. Abuser.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Good. What else?
Someone you're in a competition with professionally or something. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
dead.
Someone that you had, I mean, I think what both Steph and Ava, what you're getting at is someone with whom you may have had a fraught relationship with. Now, one thing, and I actually will give away I and you just because I want you to. Well, the reason I'm going to give it away is because it's still very pleasurable to read, and I also think it's important to sort of see. So, in I and You, we have a young woman, and they're teenagers, and a young man, and they seem to be working on a class project together, and there's some kind of flirtatious energy that's there. So in other words, we think we're looking at one thing. We think we're actually looking at a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or two people that have some sort of romantic feelings for one another. When actually what we're looking at is we're looking at a living young woman who's living, and a young man who's a ghost, and he gave her his heart. It was a transplant, an organ transplant, and it's very it's surprising because I think that why I'm bringing this up is just because you're writing a play with a ghost or scene with a ghost does not mean that all we're sort of sitting here watching is like, when's the ghost going to kind of give it up and show that they're a ghost? You know, that can be part of it. But actually what we're watching, and I think actors really understand this because they have to play the scenes, what we are watching are transactions, sort of in a moment-to-moment level. We're looking at status shifts. We're looking at, am I closer or farther away from fill in the blank? We're looking at what just happened. In other words, we're looking at some sort of human drama. And it may be, and this is why the ghost story, I think, may be actually a really useful and rich room to sort of poke around in, that if you overlay the ghost story over that, you get all the goodies of a play or a scene between two characters. You get all the goodies of status shifts, or they like her and she likes them, but we get all of that drama, and then we get this added kind of rich, strange, mysterious twist of, and one of them is a ghost. If we have, let's take the idea of a parent and a child. If we have a parent-child conflict, that sort of conflict of, you think of all those conflicts. The adult child who has anger towards the parent who abandoned them, or the parent who's a drug addict, or the parent who, whatever it may be, the parent whose withering criticism has crushed their soul, whatever it may be, you have all of that drama, the prodigal child, the rebellious child. You have all of that. We left out siblings too, that's also. We have all of the drama, and then on top of that we have, what does it do when we find out that one of them is dead? How does that alter the dynamic? How does that deepen the dynamic? The other relationship, and this comes up in PW1 all the time, is relationships between two strangers in a liminal space. And again, we go back to the no theater paradigm, all right? So a liminal space, a space sort of in between. A space in between can be a bus station. A space in between can be a parking lot. It's sort of a public space. It's a space where strangers would cross paths. Okay, so if your scene is two people that don't, at least on the surface, appear to know one another, what are the kind of, the classic one that we used to teach in PW1 Zoo Story, the classic drama of, someone, two people that really shouldn't connect, and they connect on this sort of fateful day. So I want you to think about, you're writing a two-character play, one of your characters is a ghost, but don't get too bogged down in the ghostliness of the ghost. Let that kind of live in the air and see what the dynamic is between the two characters, okay? So two characters, you'll figure out when you're going to reveal whether or not one is a ghost. You may want to get it out of the way all at once. In Eurydice, we know that they're dead, and then that kind of frees Sarah Rule up to write about other stuff. Okay, so it's up to you to figure out where the twist happens. And then I want you to incorporate at least 2 items from the list that you just received, in any way that you want. So for example, if it's the song, if you decide to incorporate the song, that could be playing on, you know, music that's being piped into the department store. You know, it could be, you know, use something sharp, could be something that is a prop that's used at some point in the scene or not. And remember, if you have a prop, make the most of the prop. You know, so if it's scissors, then make sure that they're maybe doing some sort of activity. Maybe they're cutting something for a school project, or they're making some sort of dress or some sort of, you know, article of clothing. Yeah? Questions?
So just a scene, one ghost at least, incorporated 2 of these things.
Yes. And what I want you just to be thinking about is, why is the ghost there? But I also want you to be thinking about what is the sort of conflict or dynamic between the 2 characters, separate and aside from the fact that one of them is a ghost.
Great.
It's a really good thing that you allowed it to not be what you necessarily had charted out or mapped out in your mind. I think that's terrific. Good. Others, did you have these same experiences, Amara, that it went where you thought it went, or did you surprise yourself?
I think based off of, like, when you had initially posed the question, I was seeing really specific images, and I was like, oh my god, I gotta like put that on paper now. But then as I was beginning to write it, based off of the list, things started to like influence and change it. And so like, what I thought it was going to be, it actually changed. Like the entire location changed just based off of what was here. So that was really cool.
That's good. The more you can surprise yourself, I think generally the better. I think, and those lists, you only need one other person to do a list. You know, really, it's something that you can generate amongst yourselves in a really easy way. Anyone else? Did it feel like smooth sailing, or did it feel a little bit like, I'm not quite sure where this is going?
I think from the initial exercise we did, it was helpful in terms of where I wanted it to go. And then incorporating the elements from the list was just a creative push to
How do I do that? Yeah. Right. Good. I wanna read, if you guys are comfortable doing that. Before we read, we're gonna do one more list making exercise, which is about what you have and what you don't have yet. If this is the tip of the iceberg, what's underneath the water? So this exercise, this list making exercise, is to maybe help you think about where could this go? What's underneath the water that I don't see yet? Okay? So the first element of the list is, tell me something that you know about the world of your play.
Write this in the.
No. Write it on your, no, this isn't a list to share. This is actually a list, I should have been more clear. This is a list for you to sort of diagnose and look at what you have, what you think you have. So something that you know about the world of your play.
That's not in these pages.
Yes. Or it might be hinted at in these pages, who knows? Something that you know about the world of your play. Next, something that you know about each character. So you have 2 characters. Tell me something that you know about each of them. something that you wonder about each of your characters. Something that you wonder, that you maybe don't know about your characters, but you're curious about. Something you wonder about each of your characters. Next, where is danger in your play? And if it's from more than one place, write that. Write what you know of where danger locates itself in your play. There's a moment of awkward intimacy in your play that hasn't been written yet. Do you have an idea of what that looks like? There's a moment of awkward intimacy. And it's okay if you don't know the answer yet. You can say, not sure, and save it for later. And that's okay. There's a moment of violence in your play, and the violence can be physical or it can be emotional. What does that violence look like? If I said to you, I would love an unstageable stage direction in your play, an unstageable stage direction. What would an unstageable stage direction in your play look like? Something fantastical and impossible. What would that look like? So these questions are questions that are useful questions that you can ask yourself about anything you're working on, any work in process. In particular, I think where is danger is a really, really good question. I think sometimes what happens, and the MFA playwrights know this because we sort of go through all this together, is that we have a really good idea for a play. We might have some really compelling characters. We might have a really terrific milieu, a really interesting milieu. Our play might be grappling with a really timely question in an interesting way. We might have a theatrical vocabulary, a sort of storytelling vocabulary that's really exciting. But if you don't have danger, if you don't have that sort of spark of like something really terrible could happen that could mess everything up, something catastrophic, either, I mean, whatever it may be, something high stakes, it's that PW1 issue of, what are the stakes? But I think stakes, sometimes that feels even a little bit abstracted to talk about what are the stakes. Just where's danger? Where's danger? Okay, I would love if for any of you to share. I don't know that we'll have time to read all of them, and it's totally fine not to share, but I'd be so curious to see what you came up with, if anybody would be interested in sharing what they wrote.
I'll share.
Okay, yeah.
How?
Can you send it to people? So who do you want to cast?
I mean, it can just be me and Dave for
That's great.
the purposes of not moving.
Yeah. Yes, for the purposes of not moving is good.
Should do one or two?
Okay.
You'll be two. Cool. Okay, and I'll read the stage directions. A pristine church, something about its decoration suggests it might be Baptist. On the back wall behind the pulpit, there are 3 enormous stained glass windows. One shows Jesus being crucified, one shows Jesus raising a man, Lazarus, from the dead, because I forgot who. One shows Jesus doing something else. A moment of silence, and then a single high-pitched note comes from an organ we can't see. The note goes on for about a minute, then it stops. A crash. One of the windows is broken from the outside. Once broken, we can see an eerie red sky outside. A figure, 1, walks in through the broken section, trailed by another figure, 2. They both wear gas masks and hiking gear. Here it is.
Are you sure?
I'm sure. I remember that chandelier. I remember always thinking that chandelier was so beautiful. And that door, see the little chip at the top?
I think so.
I did that. I chipped it.
How?
I can't remember. I used to know. I know I used to know, but right now I can't seem to.
That smell.
That smell, like coming home, like old books, like.
We need to take inventory.
2 takes off their backpack and starts laying things out on the pulpit. Not here.
Why not here?
Just not here. Pointing to a pew. There.
Fine.
2 moves down to a pew and continues laying things out on the pulpit. 1 is staring at the pulpit. Amazing.
Okay, 4 bottles of water, 5 dehydrated food packs, 10 chocolate bars, 3 packs of batteries, 4 phone cards. The nuts are almost completely gone. Have you been? Hey. Are you getting this down? Have you been writing down anything I've been saying?
Sorry. Here, I'm ready.
Have you been eating the nuts?
No.
These need to last us for another 3 days until we can do some scoping. See what's left around here.
I know that. Do you think it'll always be like this?
The nuts are almost gone. We'll need to prioritize that on our first trip out. 1 box of tampons left. Going to need to prioritize that too. I've got 6 cans of tuna. How about you?
I don't think I have any left.
That can't be right.
I think.
How can you not have any? When we stopped in Lewiston, we each took 10.
I may have left some behind. 2 walks down the aisle to the back of the church. Where are you?
Bathroom.
2 is gone. 1 stares off where 2 just left. 1 sighs. 1 walks over to the nuts and takes a few, popping them into their mouth and chewing very quickly. 1 gulps. 1 looks back at the ceiling. Amazing. A strange sound, like a needle scraping against the glass. 1 runs towards the broken stained glass window and looks around. The sound stops. 1 sees nothing. That single note from the organ plays. 1 stares back at where 2 left. Hello? The note keeps playing. 1 walks up to the pulpit. Maybe 1 doesn't even know why they're moving, but they are. 1 stands at the pulpit. 1 starts to shake involuntarily, like they're vibrating. The note keeps going and 1 keeps shaking. The note stops. 1 stops shaking. 2 walks back up the aisle.
What are you doing up there?
Nothing. Remembering nothing. Inventory?
You can't keep leaving things behind.
I know.
It's not our job to look after other people.
That's it.
So, yeah, all of you have been in it. So what pops?
Tuna left behind.
The setting from the top. These are characters
Yeah.
like gas masks to explore this old church.
Yeah, there's so many mysteries just in those opening images. Good. What else pops?
The red sky in the background.
One being like off their game a little bit throughout this game.
Yeah, and wondering what that's about. I think, where is danger is very animated in the scene. We do feel the sense of there's something here that is from the past or maybe also in the present that is posing a threat, that's shaking 1 up, absolutely. I also think that there's a kind of like a materiality to the scene that I really welcome, and I think is great. It's the tuna, but it's also the nuts, and it's also there's like a lot of stuff, and it feels that the stuff is odd in the context of the church, and I like that. I mean, I have a lot of good questions about the nature of the world. Good. Any hunches about where this is headed?
A theme I'm tracking is collision of past and present, and how whatever immediate danger they're in, or whatever dystopian thing is happening, that like somehow it's gonna like bring up some kind of past trauma.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm tracking.
That's my hunch too. It's good.
It seems like you could potentially like go into like the sub-levels of the church. Like it feels like you're here on the whatever ground level with the pews and all of that, but then like maybe there's a downstairs and then maybe there's another downstairs, and then figuring, I don't know, this sense of like exploration. I'm into that.
That's true. Great. Who's next?
Okay, go.
All right, Jay. How do you want to share the pages?
I'm in person 1, new person 2. And there's like a stage direction that's just like silence, a life, they age, and then I'll like snap my fingers for that.
Okay.
From the bright half light shade. 2 people at a vague place in life. You ever wonder who you'd be if you hadn't met me?
This a first date.
Yeah, but
But
about
do you think we could build a life together?
maybe. That's an answer. See, you asked me a question and I gave you an answer. Why are you like this?
I haven't been on a date in a while. That's an answer.
Why have you been on a date?
I'm a ghost.
What?
I'm your grandmother.
Not into age play.
I'm Mark Ruffalo.
That's chill.
I'm your anxiety.
Cool.
Do you think we could build a life together?
I think any 2 people could build a life together if they really wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm going to show you that I'm a ghost, and I'm going to vanish from your life as if none of our life together ever existed. Who are you now that you've met me?
I'm underwhelmed.
You're overwhelming.
You can be underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
I was waiting for you to become a ghost.
You were?
Why haven't you done it yet? Are you scared?
No.
Are you anxious?
No.
Are you looking for someone else to haunt?
Who else is out there for me?
I think generally the idea of building a life with someone is pretty outmoded. The phrase doesn't even make sense. We breathe different air, we use the same words, they are not the same mouths. It's not our life together. It's not our lives. It's never been our lives. It's my life. 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 This life is mine, and we cannot build a life together because it's impossible. I am full of dread and would rather be alone than be with you. This is the part where you show me you're a ghost.
I want to be with you.
This is the part where
I want to be with you. I am saying I want to be with you, and I chose to put my body next to your body, and here we are together.
I'm going to disappear from your life, and you'll always question if we ever meant anything to each other.
That's not for you to decide.
I'll be fine.
That's not for you to decide.
You'll be fine too.
I think you're scared of ghosts.
We'll both be fine. Give it a week.
I know so many ways to hurt you, and I haven't chosen any of them.
Download an app, wash your dishes, make your bed, go to the gym.
I'm not crazy. I didn't make this up.
Water is wet, and we'll both be fine. If we stay together, it'll be fine. If I leave you, it'll be fine for both of us.
I don't know who you are anymore.
Yes, you do. I'm a ghost.
No, you're not.
I'm a baby owl.
Stop it.
I'm going to die.
You're not that brave.
I have a memory.
I don't like to say what I want, and yet I am saying I want you to stay.
I'm an alien. I'm God. I'm intentionally vague. You'll make me into something, and then you'll be fine. And then the person 1 ghosts.
It happened. It happened. It happened.
What thoughts?
I'm full of dread.
Yes, I'm full of dread. What else? What else pops?
The my life, and I want to build a life with you in conversation.
I know so many ways to hurt you, and I haven't like used any of them.
I'm your grandma. I'm Mark Ruffalo.
That's all you know.
Dismissal. Saying like, no, you're not my grandma, because I'm not into age play.
You're underwhelming, I can be underwhelming, like that as a turn on. It's very funny.
So, you know, I think one thing that really popped for me, all of everything that everyone is saying popped, but I think it could be put in the house of you have taken two characters, and we're not quite actually, you've embraced the fact that we're not quite sure what their relationship is to one another, and how, and you have not gotten bogged down too much in the ghost part. You've played with the ghost part, but really what we're watching is two people that are trying to figure it out, and that are having trouble doing that, and are both kind of neurotic. I mean, in a really interesting way. And also, I like the way in which I think you're using ghost in that sort of sense of the verb to ghost, which I really I think is that was a big pop. Yeah. And I think also we're thinking about, which is, yeah, how do ghosts make their exits, both literally and figuratively, in the world of all your plays. What hunches do you have? Who these characters, either who they are, or what's going to happen, or what the world is, or where we're driving towards.
I guess location was something that I was wondering, because I couldn't help but picture them as like sitting at like a table in a cafe like the whole time, just like at the same table, but I'm wondering where else they could have been, particularly because they're transporting from time to time. So I'm wondering if the location changes.
Good.
I love the setup of the first date, and if there's like a progression to that.
I think that's right, and also, actually, Michael, what you make me think of, and someone mentioned this idea of building a life together. You know, from what does that mean, and the kind of the sort of problems with that metaphor. You know, or what at least what the character is seeing as a problem with that particular image, and I think that's right, and that is related to that first date, and then what, you know. Good. Is there one more? If not, I have a one last little exercise. Do you want to do that? Okay. Saved by the bell. Saved by the exercise. All right. So this is the exercise. I want you. You've written a scene, all right? So just walking through what we've done. You swam, you made a list. We talked a little bit about different paradigms of ghost stories and different kinds of ways in which ghost stories work. You dove into the deep end of the pool and actually started writing a scene, all right? And then we made a list that's a list about kind of stepping back and going, all right, what do I have and how does it fit into something larger that's not yet written? Okay, so now I want to kind of come at it from a slightly different angle, which is either taking what you've done thus far or erasing it all away. If I said to you, I want you to think of a story that is a ghost story. I want you to think of a ghost story that you could write. I want you now to write down, just in like a sentence or two, 3 sentences max, an idea for a ghost story, a play that is a ghost story. We do this in the seminar all the time, which is just, all right, so come up with an idea of, you know, I'm trying to think, what was the homework for?
The competition or contest at the center.
Right.
Contest at the center.
Yeah, come up with an idea for a play in which there's a contest in the center is that was one example. But so in this instance, come up with an idea for a play that is a ghost story. And it does not have to have any relationship to what you've already written. It can be inspired by what you've heard. It would just be something that jostles out of your mind. An idea for a ghost story. I'm just going to talk as you're writing. You want to think is, and we haven't talked about this at all, but this is another angle into thinking about what your idea might be. Is this a genre piece? In other words, is your ghost story also a love story? Is your ghost story a coming of age story? Is your ghost story some kind of theatrical version of a horror? That's a true genre. But in other words, what part of the ecosystem does your story occupy narratively? Is your ghost story a small chamber piece with two characters, or is it more about a group of friends or a group of coworkers? What's the relationship of your ghost story and time? Is it one evening and the morning after, or does it take place over the span of a lifetime? Or does it take place in one moment in time and then we go back in time, or we go forward in time? The last thing that I would have you think about, and it's something that personally fascinates me, is what can you do in the theater that would genuinely scare an audience, that would genuinely frighten an audience? What is the, and I'm less interested in any kind of special effects. What is the way in which we reframe what we're seeing on stage that would really give an audience chills? We think we're seeing this. We thought this character was this, but in fact, ... The ghost story is about unseen worlds. So you want to think about what is it that an audience may not see, and how do you as a playwright bring that to light in a way that shakes them up, in a way that reframes how we understand, our reality. Those stories from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.